Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program 1.0.5. In this episode, I'm going to review one of my Duna missions, specifically the Duna lander mission. But first, I'm going to show you the launcher it was launched on. This is the Duna mission cluster monstrosity rocket with, how many? 6 kickback solid rocket boosters and a bunch of separation motors, because apparently I needed those. With a mainsail core stage in this giant monstrosity fairing. Now, my philosophy is that you should put multiple missions on one launcher because that's more quote unquote inefficient. It is very expensive, but most of these missions did succeed. The mission included, let's get rid of that. It did include 2 orbital scanners and 3 different landers. These 2 were Ike landers, and this one was a Duna lander, which would be my first Duna landing, which is a probe. And these 2, all of the missions succeeded, but this one, the Duna lander, had a little bit of trouble. The 2 orbital scanners, one of them got to its designated orbit around Ike and did the orbital survey. This one, which one was destined for Duna, while landing the lander, I neglected to complete a maneuver node that set the Duna orbital scanner in a polar orbit, so it's off in interplanetary space. It did do a correction, so it's on intercept to Duna right now. So that mission is pending. I think it has enough delta V to get into orbit of Duna. But in this episode, we're pretty much just going to focus on the lander here. And here it is, the lander in its service module or propulsion module. Pretty basic little lander. It's very compact. My philosophy is you should make your spacecraft, especially probes, as compact as possible. To slow down, it has 4 drogues and 1 main parachute. Also has a monopropellant tank for just attitude control on the way down, mostly. It has 2 solar panels for charging, 4 antennas, which aren't really necessary, but I've been playing so much RO and remote tech that antennas are useful, so I just put them on there for show. And it has every instrument I had at the time, I think, minus the atmospheric sensor. This one that takes a lot of electricity to transmit all the data. It has every single instrument that I could have, so I'm going to cut to the landing footage. Now, we had trouble. I had to reload. I usually don't reload in my career mode save, but let's just say I was testing and it was for science. This one at first did fail to land, and I'll explain why later, but right now I'm just going to jump to the landing footage. So basically the way this worked is the propulsion module got it on its proper periapsis around Duna, and remember, we are going completely ballistic. We are not near in orbit, so we use the heat shield to slow down and protect the probe. And I set the periapsis way too low on this mission, and that's why it failed to land. So once it entered the atmosphere of Duna, what it did was it just stayed inside of the protection of the heat shield. And notice how the landing gear are sticking out of the heat shield protection a little bit. It waited until it slowed down enough to pop the drogue parachutes, and then after that it deployed the main parachute. And here I am pointing either normally or anti-normally to eject the propulsion module and not have it having to worry about it colliding into us. And you see here I am turning back around in preparation for the Duna atmosphere, and the atmosphere begins at 50 kilometers. And here I kind of took a little bit of a scenic screenshot. And right about here we hit the Duna atmosphere in hopes to slow down, of course. You see the parachute indicators say that it would be too dangerous to deploy them, and already at 36 kilometers we have pretty severe heating. And it turns out I did set the periapsis way too low. I should have put it for a little bit higher. And you see here we are already starting to get some overheating markers. Now this got really worrying to me because those started to heat up very quickly. And now you see we are approaching 20 kilometers in altitude still. Barely even slowed down, and our landing gear is pretty much about to explode. And I think I tried to use some of the RCS to slow down. This proved to be a bad thing, especially when we got closer to the ground and still didn't slow down very much. See, now we're at 12 kilometers now. We're not even in orbit, we're still beyond orbital velocity, but we are getting there. And see, now we're in orbit, but as you see, we're at a direct intercept to the ground, which means we're pretty much going to slam into it. Already about 9 kilometers. And you can see the ground there is just really low. This is pretty much when I was panicking right here. And for some reason, I don't know if I did that or the computer did that, but it lost control and started tumbling. Now the Duna atmosphere was so thin right here, it didn't blow anything up. But obviously this is a major problem because I could not point my RCS in the right direction to slow down to pop the parachutes. And now I'm just about 6 kilometers and I cannot get this stable. See, I have the computer set to a retrograde heading, but it's not getting there. And it's pretty much facing the wrong way, and we have impact at about 5.1 kilometers. And that's pretty much the main reason why the mission failed, because it just hit the Duna surface going way too fast. So I had to reload a quick save. So basically the mission plan was pretty much the same. I just put the periapsis at a safer distance. And on this run we still had overheating, but it was a much gentler re-entry. And see, we have made orbit, so we have successfully aerobraked, but we eventually slowed down enough to just come down without having to go back up into space, which the probe could not do. Well, I don't think it could have done, because the battery would probably have run out by then, and then we wouldn't have any sort of control. Now, those solar panels would not be able to retract, but I have re-entered Duna with a solar panel out, because one of my missions in 1.0.4 went wrong. Or it didn't went wrong, just I had a battery situation, and I actually had to enter Duna with one of the parachutes open, or the solar panel, and it turned out to work. So I didn't take any chances with this one, and so I just went for a direct descent. And here I'm using most of my monopropellant up like an idiot, and this turned out to be another deadly mistake later on. But right here we are almost at 8 kilometers, just waiting to be slow enough for the drogue chutes to be able to successfully deploy without ripping off. And there I am, using up more of my monopropellant like an idiot. And here we have successful drogue chute deployment and a little bit of a high G spike there. and I decided to jettison the heat shield as the drogue chute was deploying, so we would be slower than it, and it would go in front of us and hit above us. Now you see, I turned off the SAS to allow the natural guidance of the parachutes work, and I think this is how Curiosity worked. It kind of ejected the heat shield as the drogue was kind of opening. And here we have landing gear deployment and successful main chute deployment, but not opening. And I think I decided to do maybe some science in the lower atmosphere. I don't think I did. Maybe. And I decided to tweak the altitude of the main parachute. Like I said, this is very experimental. Just trying to learn the Duna atmosphere now, and we have main parachute opening. And we're quite close to the surface. I'll notice the monopropellant supply is limited at best. And the terminal velocity is about 10-11 meters per second, which is kind of safe. And there you see I do some upper atmosphere science. But I decided to try to use some of my monopropellant once I got just a couple meters off the surface to slow down and try to at least guarantee a little bit safer landing. So here we are below 5 kilometers, well below 5 kilometers, and we are still have not impacted the surface. So obviously we landed on we crash landed on a hill. And you see right now I am starting to get worried about the slope because I know this probe is a little bit top heavy, and I guess this is one of the downfalls of this probe, is that it's top heavy. And you see we're nearing the surface, very very close. And there's my retrograde RCS burn, which is RCS thrusters actually slowed us down quite a bit. But I ran out of RCS propellant just as I reached the surface. And that means I could not stabilize the probe to land and stay landed on its landing gear, so obviously the probe tipped over. And at this point I am trying to rescue it by deploying the solar panel, but my efforts turned out to be futile, and basically I was actually pretty upset with this because, you know, I had planned this out, and turns out it tipped over. But you really can't take this game that seriously, really. I mean, I tend to overthink things and overplan things, and this is what happens when I do that. But the probe turned out to complete all of its objectives, complete all of its science. And here I'm locking the battery because it's Duna nighttime. And I'm just awaiting for daytime to start transmitting all the science data back to Kerbal. And I eventually did time warp to daytime, and I did science with all the instruments and transmitted all the data back to Kerbal successfully. So the mission was a success despite the obvious semi-failure. And because I time warped to daytime, that's why I missed the maneuver node for the Duna ore scanner. Oh well, that mission got extended for a little bit, but anyway, I just hope this will help you guys make better design choices and learn from my mistakes in Kerbal Space Program. But anyway, I would like to thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.